September 7, 1940, 16:10 hours. RAF Kenley, Sector Control Room. The air is thick with cigarette smoke and the low, urgent murmur of voices. Young women of the WAF, headsets clamped over their ears, move wooden blocks with long rakes across a vast map table of southern England. Each block represents a formation of aircraft. For weeks, this room has been the electrical synapse of Britain's defense, a crucible of stress where minutes feel like hours. The plots have always followed a brutal, predictable pattern. Swarms of German aircraft materializing over the channel, then driving inland toward the vital sector airfields. Biggin Hill, Hornchurch, and here Kenley, the lifeblood of fighter command. But today, the pattern is wrong. Flight Lieutenant Alistair Sandy Wallace, a controller with eyes hollowed out from sleepless nights, stares at the table. A colossal formation, larger than any they have ever plotted, is building near Calais. Hostiles 70+, then 100+. The numbers keep climbing. 200, 300 bombers, an escort of fighters numbering twice that. It is the arm of the Reich itself, reaching across the water. Alistair grips the bakelite receiver of his telephone. His squadrons, number 64 and number 615, are refueling, their pilots gulping down tea, hands still shaking from the last sortie. They are exhausted, their ranks thinned. The entire system is stretched to its breaking point. For weeks, Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring's Luftwaffe has been systematically hammering the airfields, trying to break the spine of the Royal Air Force. And it has been working. Runways are cratered. Hangars are skeletons of twisted steel. More than a quarter of the RAF's seasoned pilots have been killed or wounded in the last 2 weeks alone. The logic of the attack is simple. Destroy the nests, and the eagles will have nowhere to land. The massive German formation begins to move. It crosses the coast at Dover. Alistair watches the WAF plotters push the blocks. He waits for the inevitable turn, the sharp angle southwest or northwest towards the airfields. Towards him, the turn never comes. The blocks move steadily, relentlessly, northwest. They bypass the fighter stations. They follow the silver ribbon of the Thames estuary. A young plotter looks up at him, her eyes wide with a question she dare not speak aloud. Alistair feels a cold knot tighten in his stomach. There is only one target that lies in that direction. A target so vast, so civilian, so unthinkable, that they had discounted it as the primary objective. London Göring's promise, broadcast to the German people, was that no enemy bomb would ever fall on the Reich. When a handful of RAF bombers struck Berlin in retaliation for an accidental bombing, the Führer had screamed for revenge. Now the price was being calculated, not in runways and hangars but in streets, docks, and homes. Alistair looks at the map, at the inexorable advance of hundreds of hostile aircraft. He understands. This is no longer a battle for the airfields. This is a battle for Britain itself. And it is coming directly for 7 million people who are, at this very moment, preparing their evening tea. The summer of 1940 was the pivot on which the history of the 20th century would turn. On the continent, the German war machine was triumphant. Poland, Denmark, Norway, the Low Countries, and France had all fallen in a storm of steel and fire. The British Expeditionary Force had been driven into the sea at Dunkirk. Now Britain stood alone, a stubborn island fortress against a conquered Europe. For Adolf Hitler, the path to final victory was clear. Operation Sea Lion, the amphibious invasion of Great Britain. But the Royal Navy remained a formidable obstacle. The German High Command knew that any invasion fleet would be annihilated unless the skies above the English Channel could be secured. The task of destroying the Royal Air Force, therefore, was handed to the architect of the Luftwaffe, Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring. He promised his Führer it would be done in a matter of weeks. The German strategy, codenamed Adlerangriff, Eagle Attack, was designed as a systematic dismantling of Britain's air defenses. It was to be a multi-phase operation. Phase 1, neutralize the coastal radar stations, Britain's electronic eyes. Phase 2, engage and destroy RAF fighter command in the air, bleeding it of pilots and machines. Phase 3, obliterate the aircraft factories and the ground infrastructure, the airfields, command centers, and supply depots. Only then, with the RAF broken and scattered, would the final phase begin. Widespread bombing of ports and cities to shatter civilian morale and soften the country for invasion. To accomplish this, the Luftwaffe assembled 2 immense air fleets, Luftflotte 2 under Albert Kesselring, based in the Pas de Calais, and Luftflotte 3 under Hugo Sperle in northern France. Together, they could deploy over 2,600 operational aircraft. The backbone of their fighter force was the Messerschmitt Bf-109E, a deadly aircraft with a fuel-injected engine and cannon armament, piloted by combat-hardened veterans of the Spanish Civil War and the Battle of France. It was superior in climb and dive to its British counterparts. Supporting them was the twin-engine Messerschmitt Bf-110 Zerstörer, a long-range heavy fighter intended to clear the way for the bombers. The bomber force was a trio of proven designs: the sleek, pencil-thin Dornier Do-17, the robust, heavily armed Heinkel He-111 with its distinctive greenhouse nose, and the terrifying Junkers Ju-87 Stuka dive bomber, a weapon of psychological terror whose sirens had become synonymous with the Blitzkrieg. Against this aerial armada stood RAF Fighter Command, under the quiet, methodical leadership of Air Chief Marshal Sir Hugh Dowding. Dowding was not a dashing battlefield commander, but a brilliant systems architect. He understood that Britain's survival depended not just on the courage of its pilots, but on technology and organization. His creation, the Dowding system, was the most sophisticated air defense network in the world. It was a layered system of detection and response. Its first line of defense was a chain of radar towers along the south and east coasts, known as Chain Home. These tall, skeletal structures could detect incoming German formations as they massed over France, giving the RAF up to 20 minutes of invaluable early warning. As the raiders crossed the coast, they were picked up by the eyes and ears of the Observer Corps, thousands of civilian volunteers who tracked the planes by sight and sound, reporting their altitude, number, and direction. This raw data flowed into filter rooms, where it was cross-referenced and plotted onto a massive grid map. From there, the refined information was passed to group headquarters, and then down to the sector control rooms like the one at Kenley. Here, in these subterranean bunkers, controllers could see the entire battle unfold. They knew where their squadrons were, their fuel states, their readiness. With precise information, they could scramble fighters to intercept the enemy at the optimal time and place, avoiding wasteful standing patrols and conserving precious pilots and fuel. It was a system that turned the defense of an entire nation into a calculated, almost scientific process. The instruments of this defense were two of the most iconic aircraft ever built. The Hawker Hurricane, a rugged and stable gun platform, was the workhorse of Fighter Command. It was responsible for shooting down more enemy aircraft during the Battle of Britain than all other defenses combined. Its partner was the Supermarine Spitfire, a graceful, elliptical-winged thoroughbred. Faster and more agile than the Hurricane, the Spitfire was the designated hunter, its primary role to engage the deadly Bf-109 escorts, leaving the Hurricanes free to attack the lumbering bombers. Both were powered by the legendary Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, the beating heart of the defense. Britain could produce the planes, but the critical limiting factor was the one thing that could not be mass-produced: trained, experienced pilots. For Pilot Officer David Crook of No. 609 Squadron, life had compressed into a series of stark sensory moments. The jarring ring of the dispersal telephone that meant, "Scramble!" The frantic sprint across the grass to his Spitfire, ground crew already pulling the chocks. The familiar scent of engine oil, aviation fuel, and his own sweat inside the cramped cockpit. The violent, chest-thumping roar of the Merlin engine bursting into life. The world shrank to the patch of sky visible through his perspex canopy. His squadron would climb, clawing for altitude, the sun a blinding glare they tried to keep at their backs. Then the voice of the controller in his ears, calm and clipped, vectoring them toward the enemy. Bandits 20+, Angels 15 approaching from the southeast. And then he would see them. At first, just a cloud of tiny black specks against the blue, but the specks grew, resolved themselves into horrifying formations of bombers, packed tightly together for mutual defense, with a glittering swarm of fighter escorts weaving above and behind them. The sheer scale of the raids was designed to be overwhelming. Combat was a chaotic three-dimensional whirlwind. Radio discipline dissolved into shouts and warnings. "On 9s above! Break right, break!" The sky became a maelstrom of arcing tracer rounds, black puffs of flak from the ground guns, and the terrifying sight of aircraft, friend and foe, tumbling from the sky, trailing plumes of black smoke. He would pick a bomber, diving through the escort screen, trying to ignore the fighters on his tail. His thumbs would press the firing button on his control column, unleashing a torrent of .303 caliber rounds from the 8 Browning machine guns in his wings. A 2-second burst could tear an engine from its mounting or kill a pilot in his seat. The physical and mental toll was immense. Pilots flew 3, 4, sometimes 5 sorties a day, Between flights, they would collapse onto camp beds in the dispersal hut, still in their flight gear, falling into a fitful, adrenaline-laced sleep, only to be violently awakened by the scramble bell minutes later. They ate on the run, their food tasting of exhaustion. They wrote letters home with a desperate urgency, trying to capture a sense of normality that felt a million miles away. The strain showed in their faces. They were mostly young men, many barely out of their teens, yet their eyes held the weary, ancient look of veterans. They lived with constant, gnawing fear, but they also possessed a fierce, fatalistic camaraderie. They fought for the man flying next to them, for the ground crews who worked miracles to keep their planes flying, and for the island nation below them. They were what Winston Churchill would later call the few, and by early September they were perilously close to breaking. The relentless attacks on their airfields meant they were fighting for their lives on the ground as well as in the air. The system was fraying, and the supply of experienced pilots was dwindling to a critical level. From a grass airfield near Le Touquet, France, the war looked very different. For Hauptmann Werner Milders, a Luftwaffe fighter ace with dozens of victories to his name, the mood was one of supreme confidence. He and his pilots of Jagdgeschwader 51 were the masters of the sky. They had swept aside the air forces of Poland, France, and the Low Countries with contemptuous ease. The British, they believed, would be no different. Göring had assured them the RAF was a spent force. German intelligence, riddled with inaccuracies and over-optimistic assessments, consistently reported that fighter command was on its last legs. They believed British aircraft production was collapsing and that the number of operational fighters was in the low hundreds. The daily reports from bomber crews claimed dozens of Spitfires and Hurricanes shot down, their burning wrecks littering the fields of Kent and Sussex. To the German pilots, the logic was simple and irrefutable. They had better planes in the Bf 109, more experienced pilots, and an unshakable belief in their own invincibility. The early phases of the Adlerangriff had seemed to confirm this. The Stuka attacks had ravaged British coastal towns and radar stations. The bomber streams, though costly, were getting through. The constant pressure on the airfields was, from their perspective, the final turn of the screw. The decision to shift the main weight of the attack to London was seen not as a strategic deviation, but as the coup de grace. It was the triumphant final act. The RAF was beaten. Now it was time to break the will of the British people. A bomber navigator, poring over his maps of the London docks, felt a sense of historical purpose. He was part of the force that would bring this stubborn, arrogant island to its knees and end the war. They expected to fly over the capital with minimal opposition, to drop their bombs, and to watch the heart of the British Empire burn. They anticipated capitulation within days. This, they thought, was not a risk. It was a victory parade. The sky over London would be the stage for the Luftwaffe's greatest triumph, a spectacle of fire and power that would force Churchill to sue for peace. They were not just flying a bombing mission. They were flying to seal the fate of a nation. On the afternoon of September 7th, the theory of air power became a terrifying reality. As the vast German formation, over 340 bombers and 600 fighters, droned towards London, the doubting system, battered but still functional, responded. On the plot table at RAF Kenley, Alistair Wallace watched the WAFs push the blocks representing his squadrons, number 64 and 615, to intercept. From Hornchurch, Biggin Hill, North Weald, every available squadron was scrambled. For the first time, the controllers were not trying to defend a series of scattered pinpoint airfields. They were defending a single massive target. This concentrated the battle in a way no one had seen before. Pilots climbing into the sky saw a sight that would be seared into their memories forever. The German armada filled the sky, a multi-layered river of aircraft stretching for miles, sunlight glinting off thousands of canopies and fuselages. It was a deliberate display of overwhelming force. The RAF's response was desperate and heroic. Group Captain Douglas Bader, the legless ace, led his Duxford wing into the fray. The plan was simple. The faster Spitfires were to climb above the formation and engage the high-cover Bf 109s, peeling them away from the main force. The Hurricanes, slower but more robust, would plow directly into the bomber streams. The sky over the Thames estuary erupted. It was a scene of organized chaos. Spitfires died from 20,000 feet, their Merlin engines screaming, cannons and machine guns ripping into the German fighter escort. The Bf 109s, forced onto the defensive, broke formation to engage in swirling individual dogfights. This was exactly what the RAF wanted. With the escort distracted, the Hurricanes could attack the bombers. Squadrons hit the bomber formations head-on, a tactic designed to break the nerve of the German pilots and disrupt their tight defensive formations. The air was thick with 303 caliber rounds from the British fighters and return fire from the 7.90 mm machine guns of the German bombers. A Hurricane from No. 85 Squadron flew straight through a formation of Dornier, its guns blazing, emerging on the other side with its fabric wings shredded by cannon shells. A Heinkel 111, its port engine on fire, fell away from the formation, trailing a thick plume of black smoke. 6 parachutes blossomed behind it. A Spitfire, its tail shot away by a Bf-109, spun uncontrollably towards the Kentish fields below. But despite the ferocity of the defense, the sheer weight of numbers meant many of the bombers got through. By 5 p.m. they were over East London. The bomb bay doors opened. High explosive bombs and incendiaries rained down on the Royal Docks, the Surrey Docks, and the densely packed warehouses and terraced houses of Silvertown and Woolwich. The earth shook. The first bombs of the Blitz struck with devastating force, sending up colossal plumes of smoke and fire. Gas mains ruptured, spewing flames hundreds of feet into the air. Warehouses filled with sugar, rum, and rubber ignited, creating an inferno that turned the sky orange and black. From the cockpits of the retreating Luftwaffe bombers, the sight was apocalyptic. The entire eastern sweep of the city seemed to be on fire, a vast burning wound on the landscape. To the German crews, it looked like the death of a city. It looked like victory. The fires of September 7th burned for days. The Luftwaffe returned that night and the night after that, guided by the glow of the burning docks. Göring and Hitler were convinced that they had found Britain's Achilles heel. By terrorizing the civilian population, they would break the nation's morale and force its government to the negotiating table. They had abandoned the methodical strategic destruction of RAF Fighter Command for a punitive, terror-based campaign. It would prove to be one of the greatest strategic blunders of the Second World War. While London burned, something miraculous was happening on the sector airfields. For the first time in weeks, the ground crews were not diving for slit trenches to escape diving Stukas. They could work through the day and night, unmolested. They filled in bomb craters on the runways. They repaired damaged hangars. They serviced and rearmed aircraft at a furious pace, bringing fighter command's readiness back from the brink. The phone lines connecting the sector stations to group headquarters, which had been repeatedly severed, were repaired and reinforced. The intricate web of the doubting system began to heal itself. The controllers in the operations rooms, their nerves frayed from weeks of being primary targets, could now focus all their energy on the singular task of defending London. The raids, though terrifying for the city's inhabitants, were strategically simpler to counter. The Luftwaffe was now coming to them, on a predictable path to a single location. The RAF could meet them in force, at a time and place of its own choosing. Hugh Dowding and the head of No. 11 Group, Air Vice Marshal Keith Park, capitalized on this error immediately. They had been given a vital, unexpected breathing space. They rested their exhausted frontline squadrons and rotated in fresh units. New pilots, fresh from training units, were given a chance to acclimate without being thrown into the meat grinder over their own airfields. Aircraft production, which had never actually faltered as German intelligence believed, continued to churn out new Spitfires and Hurricanes. The RAF was not just surviving, it was growing stronger. Göring's miscalculation was born of hubris and a profound misunderstanding of his enemy. He believed the RAF was defeated, and that a final brutal push was all that was needed. He did not realize that by shifting his aim, he had released his grip on his enemy's throat just as they were beginning to suffocate. The decision to bomb London, intended as the final blow, was in fact the very act that allowed the RAF to draw breath, recover, and prepare for the decisive battle that was yet to come. The Blitz was designed to incite terror and panic. It was intended to turn the British people against their own government, to create a wave of defeatism that would sweep Churchill from power. It achieved the exact opposite. As the bombs fell on London, a new spirit of defiance was forged in the rubble. The shared danger and nightly ordeal broke down British social barriers and united the population in a common cause. The Blitz Spirit was not a myth. It was a psychological reality. Londoners, and soon the people of Coventry, Liverpool, and other cities, displayed a stubborn, almost cheerful resilience. They rescued their neighbors from bombed-out houses, volunteered as fire watchers, and went to work the next morning with a grim determination. The image of St. Paul's Cathedral standing serene amidst a sea of fire became a powerful national symbol of survival. The royal family's decision to remain in Buckingham Palace, which itself was bombed, further solidified this sense of shared destiny. For the RAF pilots, the psychological shift was profound. The fight was no longer an abstract tactical battle over airfields in the countryside. It was now visceral, personal. As they flew, they could see the smoke rising from their own capital. They were fighting over the homes of their families and friends. This transformed their mission from a military duty into a sacred defense of their homeland. Morale, which had been dangerously low at the end of August, surged. They were no longer just the few. They were the protectors of the realm, the last line of defense between the Luftwaffe and 7 million civilians. Conversely, for the Luftwaffe crews, the psychological tide was turning against them. The daily assurances from Göring that the RAF was finished were proving to be demonstrably false. Every raid on London was met by swarms of Spitfires and Hurricanes that appeared to be growing in number and ferocity. The short, victorious hops over Kent had turned into long, grueling flights, deep into the heart of the world's most formidable air defense system. Losses mounted alarmingly. Bomber crews who had felt a sense of invincibility just weeks earlier now suffered from profound combat fatigue and a growing dread of the London run. This culminated on September 15, 1940. The Luftwaffe launched 2 massive daylight raids on London, believing it would be the final knockout blow. The RAF met them with everything it had. In the largest air battle of the campaign, Fighter Command claimed 185 German aircraft destroyed. The actual figure was closer to 60, but the psychological impact was the same. The Luftwaffe was stunned by the scale of the resistance and the punishing losses. The myth of their invincibility was shattered in the skies over London. The battle had been a physical and tactical contest, but it was now being won in the minds of the men on both sides. The devastating losses suffered on September 15th were the final piece of evidence the German High Command could not ignore. The RAF was not beaten. It was not broken. In fact, it was stronger than it had been a month prior. Air superiority over southern England had not been achieved, and without it, Operation Sea Lion was a suicidal fantasy. On September 17, 1940, Hitler issued a directive officially postponing the invasion until further notice. It would never be reinstated. The threat of a German landing on British soil, which had loomed over the nation for months, was lifted. The Battle of Britain had been won. The cost was immense. Between July and October, RAF Fighter Command lost 1,744 aircraft and, more critically, suffered 1,542 aircrew casualties, including 544 killed. The Luftwaffe's losses were even more staggering and ultimately unsustainable. 1,977 aircraft destroyed, with 2,585 aircrew killed or missing, and another 925 taken as prisoners of war. For the German aircrews, it was a catastrophic defeat from which their bomber arm would never fully recover. For the civilians of London and other British cities, the ordeal of the Blitz was only just beginning. The night bombing campaign would continue until May 1941, ultimately killing over 40,000 people and wounding tens of thousands more. But the strategic goal of the bombing, to break Britain's will to fight, was a total failure. The Battle of Britain was the first major defeat suffered by Germany in the Second World War. Its significance cannot be overstated. It ensured the survival of Great Britain as an independent nation, a bastion of democracy off the coast of a Nazi-dominated Europe. It secured the British Isles as an unsinkable aircraft carrier, a vital base from which the strategic bombing campaign against Germany would be launched, and from which the eventual liberation of Europe would begin with the D-Day landings. Hermann Göring's confident promise to his Führer lay in tatters, exposed as a fatal mixture of arrogance, poor intelligence, and strategic incompetence. His decision to turn his bombers against the civilians of London, an act of vengeful fury, ironically became the very action that saved the RAF and, with it, Britain itself. The battle was a testament to the power of an integrated defense system, the brilliance of aircraft like the Spitfire and Hurricane, and above all, the indomitable courage of the pilots who flew them. They were the few to whom so many would forever owe so much. The bombs that were meant to crush a nation had instead revealed its unbreakable heart.